The cathedral in Marseille glowed with the light of 1,000 candles on an October night in 1533. Silk, jewels, and the most powerful faces in Europe surrounded a girl of 14 as she vowed to become the future Queen of France. But behind the gold and the gospel, a different story was beginning, one written not in promises, but in a profound and personal betrayal. This is the story of Catherine de Medici, and how a single night of humiliation rewired a teenage bride into one of history's most calculating and controversial rulers. By the end, you will understand the direct line from a lonely wedding bed to a decision that bathed Paris in blood. We will uncover how love's absence taught a brutal lesson in power, and how a thirst for security curdled into a capacity for vengeance. What does it take to transform a person into someone capable of authorizing murder on a staggering scale? The opulence of the ceremony was a cruel prelude to the silence that followed. In the lavish bridal chambers, 14-year-old Catherine waited, surrounded by the expectations of two nations. The political weight of the Medici and Valois alliance rested on this moment, on the simple act of a husband joining his wife. But the door did not open for Henry. Instead, the young Duke of Orleans, already tall and handsome at 14, went to the rooms of another woman. Diane de Poitiers was a widow, nearly 20 years his senior, a lady of the court who had been a gentle presence in his life since the death of his father. That night, he chose her. This was far more than a personal rejection. It was a devastating political statement performed in the most intimate theater possible. In the 16th century, a marriage was not considered fully binding until it was consummated. The entire multi-million crown dowry, the papal blessing, the fragile peace between factions, all of it hinged on this union becoming real. By refusing her his bed, Henry was effectively telling the world, and telling Catherine, that their marriage was a hollow shell. He was declaring her irrelevant before her life in France had even properly begun. The morning after brought not comfort, but a cascade of quiet humiliation. Whispers slithered through the palace corridors like cold drafts. Courtiers who had bowed deeply just hours before now looked at the new duchess with pity or, worse, dismissive curiosity. She was the girl who could not even secure her own husband's attention on their wedding night. In a court that valued influence above all, Catherine was instantly branded as powerless. Her isolation was absolute. She was a foreigner with no family, no friends, and now, publicly, no favor from the only person whose favor mattered. From that moment, a single, burning obsession took root in Catherine's heart, one that would shape the next 4 decades. It was not initially a quest for love, but for survival. She understood with a chilling clarity that her safety, her very right to remain in France, depended entirely on winning Henry's regard. She had to make herself indispensable, to find a way into the inner circle of a prince who had already shown her the door. The trauma of that night was not a fleeting embarrassment. It was the forge in which her future resilience and her ruthlessness were first heated. It taught her that in this game, emotions were a luxury and security was the only prize worth winning. Catherine's new reality was a gilded cage with Diane de Poitiers holding the key. For 10 long years, the young queen inhabited a bizarre and painful paradox. She wore the crown, but Diane wore the influence. While Catherine sat at the formal dinners, it was Diane who received Henry's private counsel, who had her initials entwined with his on palace walls, and who was gifted the crown jewels that rightfully belonged to the queen. Diane became the unofficial regent of Henry's heart, and, by extension, of French politics. Ambassadors knew to seek her favor, courtiers angled for her smile, and policy often flowed through her chambers. Catherine, meanwhile, was relegated to the background, a silent spectator in her own story. Her one urgent, inescapable duty was to produce an heir, to secure the Valois line and her own tenuous position. And for a decade, her body refused to cooperate. The failure to conceive was a personal torment and a political crisis of the highest order. Each passing month was a fresh dose of public anxiety, each whispered rumor about her barrenness a knife to her standing. The court openly speculated that Henry would seek an annulment, that the Medici marriage would be dissolved, and Catherine would be sent back to Italy in disgrace. Her entire existence hung by the fragile thread of a pregnancy that would not come. This protracted season of humiliation was, however, where Catherine de Medici attended her most formative university. With no official power, she became a master of the unofficial. She learned to watch everything, her dark, intelligent eyes missing nothing from the shadows of the throne room. She studied the intricate web of court factions, the hidden grievances, the secret ambitions. She practiced the subtle art of manipulation, building quiet alliances with those who were also overlooked or discontented. She learned to use information as currency and patience as a weapon. This was not a woman breaking under pressure. It was a mind being tempered in the coldest possible fire. Every slight, every anxious year without a child, every sight of Diane's confidence was a lesson. The lesson was simple and brutal. Personal feelings were a fatal weakness, and survival depended on outthinking your rivals, not outloving them. The warm-hearted girl from the Marseille Cathedral was gone, replaced by a student of realpolitik, her emotions slowly calcifying into an unshakable, calculating strategy. Her time would come, but only when she was ready. The long-awaited miracle finally arrived. After 10 years of desperate prayers and medical consultations that bordered on the occult, Catherine de Medici gave birth to a son. His name was Francis, and he was not just a baby, he was her salvation. The dam had broken. Over the next 12 years, Catherine would deliver 9 more children, 7 of whom survived infancy. She had done the impossible, providing the Valois dynasty with an embarrassment of heirs. Overnight, her position transformed from precarious to permanent. She was no longer the barren foreign queen. She was the indispensable mother of the future kings of France. This biological triumph granted her a new, unassailable form of power. Henry could not dismiss her. Diane could not supplant her, for she had given the kingdom its very future. Her influence began to grow, though it was always channeled through her husband. Catherine became Henry's trusted advisor in matters of statecraft and diplomacy, her sharp mind honed by years of observation, finally finding a practical outlet. She learned to navigate the brutal religious tensions between Catholics and Protestants that were tearing France apart. Yet Diane de Poitiers still held the title of the king's heart, a lingering public reminder of that original wound. Catherine played the long game, her patience a deep, cold well. She bided her time, consolidating her relationships with her children and the key players at court, waiting for the board to shift in her favor. That shift came with a sudden, brutal crack of a wooden lance. In July 1559, during a celebratory joust, a splinter from his opponent's weapon pierced King Henry II's visor and entered his brain. He suffered for 10 agonizing days before dying. The kingdom was plunged into mourning, but Catherine's first act as widow was swift and merciless. She did not wait for the funeral. Diane de Poitiers was ordered to immediately surrender the crown jewels, including the magnificent Chateau de Chenonceau, and to retire from court forever. The rival who had overshadowed her for a quarter century was erased from the picture with the stroke of a pen. Now, the true architect emerged. Her 15-year-old son, Francis II, was king, but he was a sickly boy dominated by his wife's powerful relatives, the Guise family. Catherine stepped into the void. As Queen Mother, she became the central pillar of the monarchy, the experienced hand guiding a series of young and ineffective sons. The powerless girl from the wedding night was gone, replaced by a determined matriarch who controlled the treasury, the council, and the flow of information. Yet the humiliations of the past were not forgotten. They were etched into her political DNA. Those years of vulnerability had taught her a terrifying lesson, that any threat to her family's power, any challenge to the stability she had clawed into existence, was an existential danger. The slights she endured had fossilized into a core belief. Mercy was a precursor to weakness, and weakness led to destruction. She had a dynasty to protect at all costs, and scores to settle not with individuals, but with fate itself. The stage was now set, the player was in command, and the lessons of a lifetime were about to be applied with chilling precision. The throne room was thick with the scent of fear and candle smoke in the summer of 1572. For Catherine de Medici, now the undisputed power behind her son King Charles IX, the religious wars between Catholics and Protestants were not a holy conflict, but a deadly threat to the very crown she had spent her life securing. The Huguenots, as French Protestants were known, were not just heretics in her eyes. They were a rival political faction with powerful nobles and foreign allies, a state within a state that challenged royal authority. After decades of fragile peace treaties that shattered like glass, Catherine had become the ultimate pragmatist. Her guiding principle was not faith, but order, the kind of absolute control that would ensure her sons kept their throne and France did not splinter. The lessons of her youth, of powerlessness and vulnerability, had crystallized into a single ruthless doctrine: eliminate the threat before it eliminates you. This belief was about to be tested in the most horrific way imaginable. The immediate crisis began with a bang. On August 22nd, a shot from a window struck the Huguenots' respected military leader, Admiral Gaspar de Coligny, wounding him in the arm. The assassination attempt, likely orchestrated by the ultra-Catholic Guise family, sent a shockwave of panic through Paris. Hundreds of armed Huguenot noblemen had flooded the city for the wedding of their leader Henry of Navarre to the king's sister, a marriage Catherine herself had arranged in a desperate bid for peace. Now, with their admiral wounded, these men were angry, armed, and demanding justice. Rumors swirled of an impending Huguenot uprising, a bloody retaliation against the king's own court. For Catherine, this was the nightmare scenario, the collapse of all her careful planning, a return to the chaos that threatened her family's grip on power. The stability she had clawed into existence over 40 years seemed to be dissolving in a single afternoon. That night, a secret council gathered in the Louvre Palace. Present were the young, emotionally volatile King Charles, his brother Henry of Anjou, and their mother. Historians still debate the exact words spoken in that shadowy room, but the outcome is clear. Faced with what she believed was an imminent rebellion, Catherine made a calculation of staggering coldness. She convinced her son that the Huguenot leadership, gathered vulnerably in the city, was a mortal danger that had to be removed preemptively. She framed it not as murder, but as a surgical strike for the survival of the monarchy. The frightened king, worn down by his mother's relentless logic, finally erupted in a famous cry of frustration: "Then you must kill them all, so that not one is left to reproach me." With that, the machinery of death was set in motion. Just before dawn on August 24th, the feast day of St. Bartholomew, church bells began to ring across Paris. It was not a call to prayer, but a signal. Royal guards, led by the Duke of Guise, went to the lodgings of Admiral Coligny and finished the job, killing the wounded leader and throwing his body from the window. That single, sanctioned act unleashed a torrent of violence that the authorities could not, or would not, contain. For days, mobs fueled by religious hatred and opportunism took to the streets, hunting down Protestants. The targeted assassination of leaders spiraled into a general massacre of thousands of men, women, and children. The Seine River was said to run red. This was the monstrous culmination of Catherine de Medici's lifelong education. The girl abandoned on her wedding night learned that survival meant never being vulnerable again. The queen, who waited a decade for an heir, learned that security was the only true objective. The regent, who navigated constant conspiracies, learned that threats must be neutralized with decisive force. In that council chamber, all those lessons fused into one catastrophic decision. She did not order the massacre of the entire Protestant population out of religious fanaticism, but from a warped, brutal logic of statecraft. The Huguenots were a threat to royal authority, and to her, any threat to that authority was a threat to her family's survival, a return to the powerlessness of her youth. To prevent that, any action was justified. The blood that flowed in Paris was, in her mind, the price of the stability she had sacrificed everything to build. The frightened bride had become the architect of a nightmare, proving that the deepest scars of humiliation can eventually be paid forward by an entire nation. The silence of that wedding night echoed for half a century, from the lonely 14-year-old in Marseille to the decisive queen mother in the Louvre. Catherine de Medici's life became a single, relentless equation: power equals survival, and love is a distraction for the weak. Every slight, every year of barren humiliation, every moment she spent watching Diane de Poitiers bask in her husband's favor was a lesson etched not in ink, but in bone. She learned that in the game of crowns, morality was a luxury she could not afford, and sentiment was a trapdoor to oblivion. Her only religion was dynasty. Her only sacrament was control. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, then, was not an aberration. It was the horrific, logical conclusion of a lifetime's brutal education. Faced with a threat to the fragile stability she had built, she applied her core lesson: neutralize the danger with overwhelming, preemptive force. The thousands who died were not martyrs or heretics in her calculus. They were variables in a political problem that needed solving to protect her family's throne. Historians still argue over her legacy. Was she a monstrous architect of genocide, or a tragic figure forged by relentless circumstance, a product of a brutal time making brutal choices? Both views contain truth, but the through line is undeniable. The deeply personal cause had a staggeringly public effect. The trauma of rejection taught her that vulnerability was fatal, and that lesson, when wielded by the most powerful woman in France, cost a nation its humanity. It leaves us with a chilling thought. Sometimes, the making of a murderer isn't found in a dark alley with a knife. It begins in the gilded silence of a royal bedchamber, where a young girl learns, once and for all, that her heart does not matter. What do you think? Could the horrors she authorized ever be justified by the profound betrayals she endured? Or does the scale of the suffering render her personal trauma irrelevant? Let us know your perspective in the comments below. And if you found this journey from personal slight to public nightmare compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of history's most complex and consequential figures.